In Duluth, Minnesota, where there's a high Native population, more than 1,000 ships are docked out of the harbor each year. Here, girls are brought onto the boats and are sexually exploited. An estimated 100,000 to 300,000 youth are sexually exploited each year at the average age of 11 to 14 years old. And in Minnesota alone, at least 4,000 children are sexually exploited each year. This includes at least 345 Native women and children trafficked in Minnesota from 2004 to 2007.
I have been just astounded by the continued exploitation of young Indian girls throughout America and in urban cities and settings. It's happening as we speak, probably here in the state capital of Nebraska. And we know it's happening in Duluth, Minnesota, and other urban settings around America, where you have 565 plus federally recognized tribes that have young Indian girls that are the products of historic trauma, the legacy of America, the policies towards Indian people, the boarding schools that have impacted the esteem of Indian people, and also dominant society's attitudes towards us.
The typical sex trafficking case in America involves a vulnerable youth falling prey to a trafficker, where they are told false promises. This involves the pimp typically pretending to be the vulnerable girl's boyfriend and making her believe it is true love. From here, he will tell the victim if she loves him, she will have sex with these people. In the case of the boats from Duluth, oftentimes the vulnerable victim will be invited to a party on the boat or will be taken here by her pimp and trafficked outside of Minnesota.
And I can't tell you, when I was practicing too with Linda, how often we would see a child protection case, and it was a young girl, 15, 16, with a baby her own and her 40-year-old boyfriend, and no one did anything. You know, they just punished her mother for not doing a good job of raising her, and then punitive against her because she's a child and having a baby on her own. What is she thinking? And no one ever turned and pointed their finger at this 40-year-old and thought, is he really her boyfriend? You know, is she really living with him as a mutual partner? Because more likely than not, he was her pimp.
Girls between 12 and 14 are taken into prostitution. They are owned by a pimp. A pimp, if he has 3 to 4 girls, he can make up to $500,000 a year tax-free.
So, what makes Natives so vulnerable? According to the Garden of Truth research paper by the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition and Prostitution Research and Education, it's due to homelessness, poverty, medical problems, and a lack of basic services that results in emotional distress and mental disorders.
For me, I can say, from my perspective, I think I see trafficking and chemical dependency and all the issues that our community struggle with as symptoms of the core problem. And to me, the core problem is from hundreds of years of federal policy, relocations, loss of land, loss of identity. You know, our youth don't know who they are. And to really withstand the onslaught of these outside influences, you know, your sense of self and who you are and where you come from has to be there. And it has been, you know, torn and ripped apart from us for so long, yet we come back. I mean, the resiliency of our community is staggering.
They're vulnerable people because when you live in poverty, perhaps you don't have access to education, you don't have access to knowing what your rights are. And if you've been dehumanized all your life by the circumstances of where you live, then you maybe want to change that and you want to relocate to a city. You think that's going to be a good, safe place for you. You go there looking for answers and solutions to a better way of life, and there are these predators preying on our young girls, and they can spot them and they can see that they don't know the ways of the city. And if you've lived in an isolated reservation in America, you're very much surrounded by your own people and the laws of the reservation.
The Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center released a research paper titled Shattered Hearts. According to this, more than 1 in 3 Native women will be raped in their lifetime. More than 6 in 10 will be physically assaulted, and Native women are stalked at more than twice the rate of other women. The center is also leading the way with programs to help Native women and youth overcome these obstacles.
My girls from the Ocean Keysway program, and Ocean Keysway is not a word. That means young girl, young woman. I would have to say at least 90% of my girls are enlisted. They're surviving hour by hour, day by day, week by week, month by month.
You know, Linda and her program, they do a lot of mind-body work, you know, visualization and deep breathing and things to help bring the girls and the clients they work to themselves, so that when they're outside and they don't know where they're going to sleep that night, or someone is approaching them and they feel threatened, rather than having all that adrenaline and emotion and losing control, giving them techniques that they can use themselves right then to kind of pull themselves together and have a stronger core. And that helps them move on. Because we can't solve homelessness. I wish we could overnight, because that would solve a lot of the trafficking issues instantly, is finding safe housing so that everyone had somewhere to sleep at night, where they didn't have to worry about being attacked or assaulted, you know, or robbed. And so they didn't feel the necessity of selling themselves in order to just have a bed to sleep in that night. But that's not enough. You know, you still have to come back to the person and reteach them. You know, have them work with elders, have them learn who they are as a person, and to give them that identity back.
I have a young girl. She is just a dynamo. We'll call her Christy. Christy's from a very affluent Native American family, a very traditional family, going to school, or so the family thought. All of a sudden she's got truancy, and the truancy begins to build up, and the family's beginning to find out, you know, why isn't she going to school? One day the family gets a call, St. Paul Sex Crime Unit. We've rescued your daughter in a police sting. What we found out about Miss Christie, she was infiltrated by a family, African-American family, that included a grandfather, father, and 3 brothers. They had been notorious in St. Paul for years and years and years. They weren't picky and choosy about what nationality of girl that they used or controlled. One of the young boys, one of the brothers, is the one that started grooming her and getting her ready. Now, Miss Christie, she is FAS. She has a lot of mental health issues. At that time, she didn't have any chemical dependency issues. When she was arrested in the sting, they had captured her. They had done everything they could to get her ready. But they had, for the longest time, kept her away from a cell phone. That's where they made the mistake. They brought her to a pretty affluent hotel downtown in St. Paul, and they told her, you go in and here's a phone. He's going to call you, and he's going to tell you what he wants. Do not discuss price, ever, because that's what the girls were told. Do not discuss price. When her pimp left the room, she locked herself in the bathroom and dialed 911. They had her for a number of years, actually, from her family. Family couldn't find her. This young girl called 911 and said, I'm so-and-so, and I've been missing for a long time. I'm in this hotel, and I'm in this room. Help me. And they came. The end result of her, she needed to testify, and they couldn't get her to testify. I'm certified in mind-body medicine out of the Center of Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, and that's just deep breathing techniques, relaxation techniques, and that is what I used with our young girl, getting her ready to testify. In the end, after 8 sessions with her individually, getting her to calm down, getting her to focus, concentrate just on one particular spot in that room, she was able to give 161 pages of testimony. She was able to bring down the entire family. Now, this young girl got one of the highest sentences for a trafficker in this state history, 30 years. 30, 20, 10, 15, 10. I think she got all of them.
Stories like these are not uncommon. According to the Shattered Hearts report, a majority of Native youth are trafficked by family members.
I'm also a survivor of prostitution and pornography as a child. I was used by family members until I got away when I was about 19 years old. One of the women that I was interviewing about the ships, she was living in a homeless shelter, and at the end of the interview she just started crying, and she said, it was hell. It was just hell. And she asked that, we get them some pamphlets and a room and a table so that they could come together and talk with each other. But the amount of isolation and the pain and the shame that the women live with on an ongoing basis is profoundly sad and profoundly unjust.
According to Christine Stark, in the Duluth area, the close proximity of reservations, along with an international port and high degree of wealth, creates the perfect storm for natives to become trafficked. According to Stark, sources have seen trafficking on the boats in Duluth occur since at least the 1940s. In order to stop this issue, better laws need to be put into place. According to Stark, the Swedish model is one that may work. This involves decriminalizing the woman and criminalizing the demand and selling.
So the men who are buying and selling women and children, to put the focus on them, because they're the ones, they're the reason why this exists. And if it's going to be stopped, it's going to be because either they stop behaving in those ways, they stop acting like they have entitlement to go out and buy a woman or child for their own sexual purposes, or because we stop them by putting the focus on them.
The women aren't willing participants. They really need to be seen as the victims that they are, rather than as a criminal and being prosecuted.
When a young girl is rescued, typically she's rescued in a police sting, a hotel, or wherever it may be. She is picked up by the Minneapolis Sex Crime Unit, or St. Paul Sex Crime Unit, or now Hennepin County Sex Crime Unit Task Force. She's given immediate services because of safe harbors. Those immediate services include a full medical workup, a full mental health assessment, and at that point then she goes into the child welfare system here in the state of Minnesota, specifically within Hennepin County. At that point then they have to determine what are the risk factors for the girl. What is her history of running? What is her history of truancy? So a lot of our young girls at that point then go in to serve their time. As Native American people, especially in the urban areas, we've become totally assimilated. We've reached that point where we don't identify as being Native American. A lot of our young girls don't recognize their tribes, their customs, their traditions, their ceremonies, their culture. They assimilate and they accept the street life, and the gang life is part of their culture. It's incredible the way you can actually see a physical change on their faces. And now when you sit around the table, and from the time that I first met the girls, now when they introduce themselves, they'll say, I'm so-and-so, this is my given name. This is my Indian name. This is my tribe. And I can say 10, 12, 20 Ojibwe words, or Sioux words. Instead of, I'm a survivor of the streets, I'm a prostitute. Honoring them, accepting them for the way that they are, the way that they come to you, and teaching them every single moment of the day. That's really, really important. Actually having them pray, having them put the sponge together, and then even going past that point of teaching them, where did those plants come from? Where did sage come from? Did it come from a store? Do we buy it? Where does sweetgrass come from?
It was about probably 16 years ago now when I went back and I got my Indian name, and I got my totem, and I started participating in ceremonies, dancing at powwows, and learning traditional ways. My whole life changed.
You have a value. You have a worth. and you have a strength. You just have to find it. And then no matter what anybody else tells you from the outside, you know who you are, and that's what lets you thrive.
So, what can the public do to help with this issue?
Write letters to their congressional delegation, to their local state senators to say, we want this to stop. Our girls and boys, because boys are exploited as well. We are of value, and we aren't going to tolerate this anymore.
So if you're going to talk about it, you have to be educated about the stereotypes. You have to be educated about the realities and the survivor stories and all the intricacies. But you also have to be aware that most people don't believe it happens in their place, their town, their community.
Native youth are especially vulnerable, and more programs and shelters are needed. In order to address these issues, going back to cultural traditions and ceremonies helps with the healing process.